I'm Zora Artis. I'm the chair of the IABC Asia Pacific Region Board. It's my pleasure to host today's webinar with two communication professionals who I greatly admire. They'll be sharing their insights and tips into the IABC Gold Quill Awards and how you can maximise your chances of success with your entry. Our guests today are Monika Lancucki ABC and Ayllie White. Monika has the dual role of Managing Director of Jesuit Communications and Media, as well as the Director of Provincial Communications for the Australian Jesuits. Monika is a long-time member of IABC and has served as a leader of the Victoria chapter. He's the past chair of the IABC Awards Committee, who was responsible for delivering the Gold Quill Awards and has been a member of a number of other IABC committees. She's also a Gold Quill Award winner and past co-chair and evaluator of the Gold Quill Blue Ribbon Evaluation Panel that we had during the judging period. Ayllie White is the Head of Corporate Relations for the Sunshine Coast Airport in Queensland, Australia. Ayllie is also a Gold Quill Award winner, but she holds the special distinction of being the recipient of the Business Issue Award. Now that's an award that's a special one, as I said. It means that it was an entry that addressed a critical business issue that threatened the well-being or the viability of the organisation and shows the strategic involvement while presenting an effective and innovative resolution with measurable results. Ayllie is also a Gold Quill Blue Ribbon Panel evaluator. So before I hand over to our guests, the format for today is that we will have 40 minutes of presentation from Monika and Ayllie, followed by questions and answers. So I do encourage you to use this opportunity to ask questions. So we'll be very open in our answers for you. There's two icons at the base of the screen. One is the chat icon and the other is the Q&A icon. So you can use either of those to pose a question, and then I'll ask those of Monika and Ayllie. So I'm going to hand over now to Monika to kick us off. Go ahead, Monika.
Thanks, Zora. Hello, everyone. I really welcome this opportunity to share some insights around Gold Quills. I've been very passionate advocate about the Gold Quill Awards for a long time now, and it's really encouraging to see the growth not only of entries but also of winners from the Asia Pacific region over the years. So hopefully with today's seminar we'll be able to build on a really solid foundation and result in some more success in the 2020 program. So in terms of what we'll go over today, bit of an outline of what we'll be talking about. So firstly, I'll give a bit of an overview about what the Gold Quill Awards are, and a high-level overview of the divisions and categories, highlighting some of the more recent developments. Briefly go over some special awards, one of which Zora has already mentioned, the strategic framework for the awards, and how to craft an entry. We'll go over how they're evaluated and who evaluates them. And this is probably the most valuable part of it. Some of the tips from myself and Ayllie as entrants and evaluators, tips for success. So things to watch out for, things that the judges look for, and things to avoid tripping up because of assumptions and the like. We'll also give a bit of an outline of how to enter, and Ayllie, you're very lucky to have her here today. She will share an overview of her successful Business Issue Award entry from a few years back. We will wrap up with some time for questions. So one of the beauties of the Gold Quill Awards as opposed to other awards programs is that they are really the only truly global awards program that cover the span of the communications industry. The awards are broken up into 25 categories across 4 divisions. The slide there shows you what those divisions are and gives some indication of the kinds of categories that come under them. I'm not going to go through all of them there, but what I would say is that by way of recommendation, it's really important to read the category descriptions really carefully and be sure to select the one that best meets your project or entry. You can choose to enter the same project across a number of categories, but my advice to those thinking of doing that is it's really important to actually address the criteria and purpose of each of those categories. And there is information about what that is on the Gold Quills website. Students are also encouraged to enter the awards, and there are special student awards in this program. To be eligible to enter as a student, at the time the work was created, the student must have been attending studies full or part-time or working towards a degree at college, university or other educational institution. If there are students who want to enter, I suggest that they get in touch with people involved in the evaluation that can give greater guidance on what those requirements are. But broadly speaking, they reflect the actual requirements of the main awards, save that the evaluation component can be done as a hypothetical because it's acknowledged that a lot of students won't have the opportunity to actually implement their campaigns if they are done as projects as part of their course of study. Just one thing to note is that academics, professors, lecturers or advisors can't enter on behalf of students. Students have to actually enter the awards themselves. So in terms of the categories, one thing that I did want to call out was a new category that's been included in the awards for the first time this year, and that is a diversity and inclusion category. This category sits within the communications management division, and it's designed to recognise work or campaigns that are aimed at building a culture of inclusion for an organisation with internal or external stakeholders or both. The entries must focus on the communication elements of the diversity and inclusion programs, not just the, not be skewed towards the actual practical HR elements or other elements that might have been a component part of the program. These could be specific topic-based initiatives, special events or wider organisational strategies to advance the D&I aims. So in terms of the special awards, Zora mentioned the Business Issue Award. That really is the creme de la creme. It's one award each year for the most impactful, if you will, entry. And Ayllie, who will present later, actually won that a few years back. There are also other special awards. So there are what's known as the Best of the Best awards. These are selected by the evaluation panel out of all the winning entries. They're often the highest scoring ones, but not necessarily. They really are the ones that stand out in terms of their impact. Most of those tend to go to entries in the communications management category. They represent the very best of the entries that are seen in a given year. The Business Issues Award is presented to the entry that addresses a critical business issue that threatened the wellbeing or viability of an organisation and shows strategic involvement while presenting an effective, innovative resolution with measurable results. So it really is one where, you know, you made the difference. It's very hard to get and it is a very prestigious award. There's also the Sharon Burzock Student Award, so that goes to the highest scoring student entry. The Jake Whitmer Research Award, which is presented to the entry that shows outstanding research that was commissioned or developed by a communicator and was instrumental in ensuring the success of a communication program. Then we have what are colloquially known as the Of the Year Awards. These are broken down into various types of organisations. So there's one for boutique agency, small agency, mid-size agency, large agency, and then there's one for the Corporate Comms Department of the Year and the Not-for-Profit Communications Department of the Year. They are a bit of a numbers game. They're based on the number of winning submissions from a particular department. So if you've got a lot of projects that you feel are worthy of awards, I encourage you to consider entering them, and that would improve your I guess, eligibility for one of these awards. In terms of the strategic framework for a communications management entry, this is basically outlined on the template that's available on the Gold Quills website. I'm not going to go through all of these. Ayllie will talk through these various elements when she talks about her project. But one thing I will emphasise is that it's really important to actually follow these headings and include all of this information. Because of the way in which the awards are evaluated, you will be required to actually address all of these elements. Sometimes people submit award entries that they're entered in other programs and they don't follow this format. That's not a way in which to succeed in this particular program. So really important to follow the framework and address all the criteria for an entry. In terms of communication skills, the elements of the entry are slightly different. The skills division entries showcase technical skills rather than, I guess, the strategic management skills that are the focus of the communications management division. These kind of skills are things such as editing, writing, design, publications, production, and the like. The entries here tend to be a bit more tactical in nature. Doesn't mean they're not important, they're just different. And notwithstanding that they are quite tactical in nature, they really still need to demonstrate strategic alignment and why this particular element of work was important, and address the creative process as well as measurable results tied to objectives. One thing to note in the skills entry is that the actual work sample is weighted more heavily than in the communications entry. So I encourage anyone thinking of entering a skills division entry to really focus on what you include as part of your work sample. There are also some pretty prescriptive rules that govern the entries. They may sound a little draconian, but they really do help ensure fairness, equal weighting to all entrants, and avoid a situation where the judges are perhaps exhausted by the sheer volume of content in an entry, where perhaps they would be unable to focus fully on the actual quality of the work. So some of the things to bear in mind for a communications management entry is to really stick to the 4-page limit for the work plan. Use the entry form for the skills division entries. You really can't enter any other way in that one. And the fields are word limit prescribed, so you've got to stick to the word limit in that particular division. There are rules around margin size, size of paper, font sizes, and the size of the work samples and number of the work sample. I encourage you to be very, how should I put this, discerning in what you choose to include in your work sample. Every judge reviews about 10 of these entries, and so it can be quite challenging to plough through all the content. So do think about what you include, cross-reference from your work plan or from the fields that you populate from your skills division entry into your work sample to make it easy to identify the documentation you're providing, to illustrate the points you're wanting to make, to demonstrate why your work is excellent and worthy of an award. So in terms of how the entries are evaluated, there's a blue ribbon panel that's pulled together each year. It sits across multiple locations right around the world. People who serve on the panel are communications practitioners, very experienced communications practitioners, often multiple award winners themselves, accredited specialists. They can come from any number of different organisations. So that's something that's really quite useful to bear in mind in terms of how you prepare your entries. Don't assume that somebody who's evaluating necessarily comes from a corporate background. They can come from not-for-profit, they could come from government, they could come from any kinds of organisations. So really have a think about how you're expressing yourself in your entry, and try and avoid knowledge-based assumptions that people understand terminology or references, and also try and avoid, I guess, geographic assumptions and colloquialisms that could distract from or perhaps not be well understood by somebody marking or evaluating your entry on the other side of the world. The awards, one of the beauties of the awards is that they're not actually a competition, they are an evaluation. So in terms of professional development, you will get quite detailed feedback on your entry that you can then take back and I guess better understand and improve the work you do. They're evaluated according to a 7-point scale. That scale is supported by rubrics that actually specify what is needed in order to achieve a particular score. So if you meet the criteria and address the criteria that are outlined in the plans, then you maximise your prospects of achieving a high score and getting an award. The awards are designed to be very strategically focused. So I emphasise the need to address, excuse me, sorry, I guess address the strategic context in which you did the work. As I flagged, they're not a competition. They're marked out of 7 points. If you achieve a score of 5.25 to 5.74 in the evaluation, you will get a Gold Quill Award of Merit. And if you score 5.75 or higher, you will get an Excellence Award. So in that sense, you know, it is a great opportunity to get recognition for your work without without the luck element in it, really. If you've done good work, odds are you will get an award, or excellent work rather than good work, but yeah. So the Blue Ribbon Panel, like I said, sits right around the world. There's locations in San Francisco, the UK, South Africa, Toronto, Melbourne, Sydney, Philippines, and the judges could come from any one of those geographies. So there's also a virtual panel, so people who are in very, you know, other areas or may not belong to a specific chapter of IABC, they can also serve through a virtual panel that evaluates electronically. The awards are always evaluated by 2 evaluators who then reconcile their scores. Usually my experience has been that the evaluators tend to have quite similar evaluation. This is driven by the rubrics, and there is a bit of discussion before landing on a score for each element of an entry. And then there is an audit process for quality assurance purposes where a sample of entries is then reviewed by a 3rd evaluator. So you are getting a lot of, I guess, personalised attention for your entries, which is part of the value, I guess, in entering the awards in the first place. So in terms of tips for success, first tip is really select the right project. Is the project really worthy of an Excellence Award? Does it have clearly defined goals? Did it meet or surpass its measurable objectives? Does it have measurement and evaluation? I guess, you know, the real crunch is, did this work matter? Did it make a difference? Is it complete or a discrete completed part of a larger project with its own measurable objectives and results? One thing that you might want to consider is if your project is very large, for the purposes of the awards, it might be simpler and cleaner to actually select a discrete portion of it and submit that as an award entry rather than try and cover off the whole project in 4 pages. But you know, have a good think about whether all those elements that are required for that discrete part have been satisfied. The other thing to remember is to pick your timing. So some component of the project needs to have been implemented, published, or broadcast between January 2017 and the time that the entry is submitted. If a long-term strategy was developed prior to January 2017 and hadn't previously been entered, it is eligible for entry. And if you entered your work in 2018 or 19 and didn't get an award, you can actually re-enter and revise your project and re-enter. But if you have won an award in a previous year, you can't resubmit it this year. The other thing to always remember, and this is a tricky one, is you need to have completed the evaluation component. Otherwise, you're not going to have good prospects of success. So it may be that some projects need to be deferred for a year until there has been sufficient time to complete that element of the entry or the project. I've touched on this before, but you need to think about which category to choose, and choose that category carefully. Which one is going to be the best for your project? Do you enter it in one? Is there more than one category that applies? Do you enter it in one and not another? And really, you do need to customise the entry to meet the requirements of each specific category. There have been some changes to the descriptions of the categories this year, so I encourage you, if you've entered before, have a look at those descriptions, because they may be slightly different to what you're used to, and then pick the category that's going to maximise your prospects of success. One of the challenges about the Gold Quill Awards is the timing. So the deadlines actually fall over the summer period in the southern hemisphere. In Australia, it's a bit of a dead zone in January here. So people may be away. The actual writing time for these Gold Quill Award entries doesn't necessarily have to take very long, but they do take a bit of planning and gathering of resources. You may have research that you need to draw on or find or analyse in support of your entry. You may have evaluations that you are reliant on other departments in your organisation to provide, such as financial metrics or HR metrics. The people that have that information may be on leave at that time of year. So if you are thinking of entering, have a think about who you need to engage in the process to get the material you need for each component part of your entry, and speak to them early to get that information in, or find out when they're away so that you know when you can get back to them. Also allow plenty of time for getting feedback. One of the things that I will talk to a bit later is the need, or the benefits, I guess, of getting people to read through your entry and offer their insights and thoughts on it. Again, if people are away over the summer, this can be hard to do. So if you are thinking of asking people for feedback, I recommend speaking to them sooner rather than later, just to get their timing as to when they might be available to do that. There's a lot of available resources about quills on the website. I'm not going to go through all of them there, but I do encourage you to go to those links. The Midas Touch Guide is probably the go-to in terms of what to include, what not to include, and to give you an idea of what the inclusion of what information is going to result in what kind of a score for each component of an entry. So it's also very useful to, once you've written your entry, go through it with that Midas Touch Guide and use it as a bit of a checklist to see whether you've included all the elements that you need to in order to submit a winning entry. One thing IABC does is it actually makes it really, they make it really easy to win in some respects, in that it's very transparent. There's really no secret sauce to it. They really do provide a lot of information around what constitutes a winning entry, and I do encourage people that are thinking of entering, particularly for the first time, to read widely and look at all those resources and really use them to craft their entries. One thing that often comes up as an evaluator is that one of the sections, particularly in communications management entries, is the need to describe your audience. And quite often people list an audience or one or two audiences without really going into very much detail as to the kinds of behaviours or demographic characteristics or psychographic characteristics that identify or relate to that audience. You really do need to analyse your audience by reference to what you're trying to achieve in order to score well in the section, in the audience analysis section. So I encourage you to sort of have a think about some of those elements that are there on this slide and address those when you are identifying your audience. It can be also useful to split your audiences up into primary and secondary audiences and talk us to why you're doing that and why you need to prioritise one audience over another. Goals and objectives is another, I guess, section of the entry which often presents a challenge for people. It is critical to get this right, because if you don't get this section right, it's really hard to get the evaluation section right, and it can really impact negatively impact your prospects. The key to this really is to identify overarching goals and then have quite smart objectives. So I'm assuming most people know what they mean. So specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time-based. It can often help to include a table of your goals and objectives and then cross-reference to that table from your evaluation section later in the entry. Makes it very easy to demonstrate the success of your communications project if you can do that and demonstrate that your goals and objectives have been met. The other thing too is the need to identify clever solutions or great creativity. These awards are aimed at recognising excellence, and so it's something more than just really good work well done. It needs to be smart, it needs to be creative, it needs to be innovative. It really needs to prompt that oh wow factor from whoever's evaluating it. It doesn't have to be expensive. So the reason why I chose this image to illustrate it is that bulldog clip there. It's such a simple solution. It's such a clever solution. It's not a very expensive solution. So have a think about, what is the wow factor in the work you did? What is the impressive thing? And make sure that you articulate that very clearly so that your work truly shines. I've spoken a little bit about SMART objectives already, but it's really important to align your measurement to your SMART objectives. So if you mentioned an objective, make sure you identify how you propose to measure that objective and provide the results in the results and evaluation section. As I mentioned, it's useful to use a table for these. One thing to bear in mind is that whilst people love numbers, they're not the only measure of success, and it's quite legitimate to include anecdotal feedback as part of your evaluation as well. So just because it can't be measured doesn't mean it can't be included, but it's helpful to have both qualitative and quantitative evaluation measures in your entry if possible. Another thing to consider is who you're writing for. So it's really important to know your audience, not just in terms of who you're writing your work for in terms of the project, but who you're writing the entry for. So as I mentioned, judges come from right around the world. They come from a range of different industry backgrounds. Don't assume knowledge about your industry, your market, even your local geography. And avoid jargon, because some jargon is very geo-specific and may not be understood by judges who are evaluating entries on the other side of the world. So one way of, I guess, testing for this is getting people to proofread your entry and seeking feedback. Often people who aren't working in your industry, a relative's usually a good option, someone who isn't familiar or as familiar as you are with your day-to-day work, and incorporating that into your final entry. And then I guess my final tip is consider, particularly if you're a first-time entrant, getting a mentor via the IABC APAC board or via your local chapter. I personally found mentors incredibly helpful, particularly when I was first starting out entering in these awards, and they can offer really valuable insights. And even if you're an experienced entrant, it's a really useful peer feedback option to seek out. And there's a lot of people that quite willingly and will take the time to offer that feedback and support others who want to enter the program. So I encourage you to do that as well. The entry process, the entries have opened. The early bird deadline has passed. So the next deadline is on the 9th of January. And there's a late deadline later in January, I think it's the 23rd. For communications management, you need the work plan and work sample. For communication skills, entry form and work sample. They're uploaded electronically, and then you just pay your fee. There's a sliding scale of fees, so there are financial incentives to enter earlier rather than later. The process is outlined on the website. It's fairly straightforward, and the platform is reasonably user-friendly. So I might pass over to Ayllie.
Thank you, Monika, and thanks those who have joined us. I just wanted to give you a little bit of insight into my entry. The entry that I put in the year that I won the Gold Business Issues Award was my first entry. And to be fair, I haven't actually re-entered, because when you kind of go in at that level, it's kind of hard to top that. So I've taken the opportunity to ride the high for a number of years. But I wanted just to give you a bit of insight into how I skinned the cat, and there's always more than one way to skin the cat in terms of anything in life, but also comes to pass with the Gold Quills entry. Monika is right though. IABC wants you to succeed, so there are so many resources available to help guide your entry, and I recommend you use all of those, particularly the Midas Touch, and that was what I used as my Bible. I didn't take Monika's advice. I didn't plan in advance. My entry was crafted in the space of a weekend. We had come out of our project towards the end of the deadline. We were able to get some of our research processed in time to put the entry together, but we were up against the clock, and there were certainly times where I thought, I'm not going to get this done, I'm going to miss the deadline. But as it was, it was a really valuable experience. Just to give you a bit of context, I shouldn't say my, but it was our entry, because it was a joint entry. I was working for Transurban, who operates toll roads in Australia at the time, and I worked closely with colleagues at Vic Roads, who were the roads authority in Victoria. And together we were closing two major freeways in the centre of Melbourne at the same time over the Christmas summer period. So as I say, it was a joint entry. We opted to enter this as a media relations entry, but we could have entered it under several categories. The reason why we entered it under media relations was it was an easier piece to carve off in terms of those timeframes, and our evaluation had landed in that space sooner than some of our other evaluation. I thought about entering it under the crisis and issues management, but I actually felt it wasn't meaty enough under that category. But fortunately for me, the judges disagreed and gave it the Business Issues Award. The entry explained how we used media relations, and we also used other techniques on how to raise awareness of the major road closures, how to encourage behaviour change, how to build audience understanding, and how to protect organisational reputation, which was really critical for both of us. When you're putting together your entry, the first section will be the business need. And really, for me, this is where to put a lot of time and energy. This is where you bring your project to life. This is where you describe why it matters, not just from a communications point of view, but for your organisation. What is your burning platform? And for us, we had a couple of layers. First of all, operationally, we needed to get traffic off our detour routes in order for them to function and to not bring the city to a standstill. So that was the operational need. Reputationally, we needed to protect our organisation's reputation, not only for Transurban, but I'm sure Vic Roads wouldn't mind me saying for them as well. From a Transurban point of view, we were bidding on another road project interstate, and also bidding to take over a network of toll roads in another jurisdiction. So it was fair to say that not only was our state government looking at our success in this space, but other jurisdictions were as well. From a government perspective, and again, worth putting the context, this is your opportunity to frame up the broader context and the broader challenges. But for us, we were also going into a Victorian government election where one of the hot topics was the prospect of building a toll road tunnel. So this was hot topic. Interestingly, when we announced our project and the road closures, we were put on notice quite clearly by the media, and particularly the Herald Sun, which is Australia's largest newspaper. And basically they said we were staring at a PR disaster. So I put that in. I put that in the business need. That was part of the burning platform. That was why we needed to protect reputation. And then there's also an opportunity to describe what informed your business need and your communications approach. And for our project, again, every project will be different, but we took the traffic data, which helped tell us about drivers' behaviours. We took the traffic modelling that told us what we could expect the traffic delays to be if we couldn't get traffic off our detour route. And then we had some communications research for other major road closures, not for this one, but we were able to extrapolate some of those learnings from other communications research. So you don't always have to commission research or bespoke data. Some of the data source that can inform your approach can be held within the business. It's just the way that you're presenting it. So do seek out that data and use that to your advantage. In section 2 of your entry, you will need to give some analysis of your stakeholders, and this is just a grab from this section in my entry. As Monika mentioned, it's really great to make use of tables because it gets a lot of information across clearly and gives you some structure around that. It's also really what we see as evaluators. We often see people just state a broad audience or stakeholder group and not provide any context. So you'll see the way that I've done this. Again, this was a media relations entry. So I've looked at media and I've provided some insight into, you know, their motivations. So for us, it was Christmas, New Year, which is traditionally a quiet time for news. They've got to find content, and we knew that we were going to be the biggest story going around. There had been, the reason my entry was called Carmageddon was because there was a major road closure the year before, and the headline that ran in the one of the daily papers was Carmageddon front page. So there was a strong appetite for another Carmageddon, and media were preparing front page splashes about gridlock and, you know, vox popping grumpy drivers. And then we also took the opportunity to explain what research we had available to us. So we were able to draw on some research for other road projects, but also draw back on what we knew from our audience from some of the anecdotal research. So again, as Monika says, use the anecdotal stuff to support your work, but also where you've got strong data or research, then absolutely use that. But what I like about that anecdotal stuff is it helps frame up the environment you're working in. So that's how I approached the stakeholder analysis. And I think the beauty of that was you were able to drill down on a couple of different levels. So I detailed probably about 8 key stakeholder groups in my entry, but I've just given you a snapshot there. In the 3rd section, this is where you outline your goals and objectives. And again, this is a bit of a missed opportunity, I think, for entries where we evaluate where they just don't quite nail this. The entry will ask you for your goal, and this can be quite overarching. Ours was quite high level in terms of we needed to build awareness and acceptance of those road closures and help drivers make an informed decision about their travel. That was our overarching goal. Then what I did was actually drill down into those SMART objectives. So again, what I did was I had 4 objectives, and then what I also did was tie those objectives back to your business need. And I think this made my entry quite strong in the ability to follow why it mattered, why the objectives were measuring what mattered. So I'll step you through the first one. We were wanting to raise that target audience awareness of those road closures prior to and during the works. And that was aimed at reducing that business need, that operational business need of reducing the traffic on the detour route. We set out our target at 50%, and also we came up with a target audience reach. I also provided some context as to why I had put that as my target. So it's using a bit of data to benchmark my targets, just again to provide the evaluators with some context as to why I thought that that was a reasonable target. And again, we had referenced information from several years ago on a completely different project, which showed, for a long-term construction project, whereas ours was a short-term maintenance project, which put awareness of its works at 60%. So I thought, well, 50% is reasonable. So that's how I structured my objectives. You'll see that I've done that to different degrees, but that's what I found really useful. And you'll see that I flow this through, particularly when we get to the evaluation. In terms of section 4, this is about what you did. One of the big missed opportunities I see when I'm evaluating entries is that people don't take the opportunity to outline their key messaging. And again, you don't need to go to your key messaging Bible of 50 pages worth of key messaging. That's not what it's about. It's about high level, your top 3 to 4 key messages. And again, what I did was I looked to align those with the business need or objective. So one of my key messages were the reasons for the closure. So for us, we needed to do the work under the closures because of safety, because the road surface had become unsafe, and that aimed to build audience understanding. So again, link your key message to your business need or your communications objective, and I think that makes your entry really powerful and really shows strategic intent in everything you do. This is also the section where you get to outline your tactics, where you get to tell us about the cool things that you've done. People generally rush in and want to tell you this and tell you in a lot of detail. This doesn't actually need a lot of detail, but some of the tactics that I used, and they weren't particularly cool, but they were just smart, sensible communications tactics. We built support amongst our influencers and stakeholders prior to announcing things in the media. So when media went to find other voices, those voices were educated and had our key messaging. We also went for the worst case scenario, and sometimes in communications and particularly in media relations, sometimes you shy away from that. But for us, it was really important for people to understand that this could actually be really ugly and they could be really inconvenienced by our roadworks. So this is what I called telling it like it was or what it could have been. In the end, we were really successful in getting traffic off the road. So it gave us a different problem in that we then needed to keep the media interested and also to keep that message that we still needed people to stay away from the area. And the other important tactic for us was we were working in a confined space, in a locked down tunnel where nobody could see what we were doing. And we were bringing the city to a standstill. So it was really important that we showed the progress of what was happening. So it was really visually rich. So we took the opportunity to take a TV crew down there every day to see the progress of the works. And that was really important in showing people that we were working 24/7, going around the clock. It was really noisy, dusty, dangerous work that we were doing down there, and it was not a safe environment for traffic to be travelling through. Section 5 is where you tell us a little bit more about how you implemented your plan and also the challenges. This is a section which will ask you for resources and budget. And as an evaluator, I find it really difficult when people don't provide details because I can't tell whether they've managed a lot with a little, or whether they've got the best bang for buck out of what they've spent. So I was quite upfront in my entry. we provided details of our media relations budget, which was, I think, about 30K from memory, as well as the broader communications and marketing budget, because we did an awful lot of advertising and broader communications. So again, I put both of those levels in there so people understood not only the media relations budget, but the broader communications budget. And we also detailed the communications resources, as well as the other business resources, such as our project spokesperson. So again, we were quite upfront with the amount of effort and time and dollars put into our project. And I would encourage you to do that. I know people can, if you feel you can't, then put it as a percentage of the total project, or give us some context, because that again lets us know whether you've spent money and or used your resources appropriately for the outcome. This is also the section where you get to detail your challenges, and people tend to shy away from this, but I think this is a great opportunity to tell us the things that went wrong. So you get to tell us about who the heroes are, which is obviously your team, as well as the villains in your story. So was it the media? Was it senior management? Was it politicians? Was it your competitors? Tell us about who threw the curveballs at you and what they were. So for us, our challenges were, we needed to maintain media interest despite there was no catastrophe or Carmageddon, because we needed to keep that message out there to say, stay away from the roadworks. You can still expect long delays. These roadworks went for about 12 days, so it was hard to keep momentum, particularly when there was no drama. We had new communication staff at both organisations. Both teams had been through big restructures and had completely new staff, or staff in different roles. There were lots of competing transport messages. So we had a major rail project who also were closing a rail line at the same time. So we needed to work in and support those messaging, but that was a challenge for us. Also, there were concerns around work quality, and we had to counteract that. Finally, section 6 is where you bring home the bacon. So this is where you tell us how you did against your objectives. And again, go back to that table arrangement, because it's a really strong way of tying it back and tying up all your loose ends. So for me, I stated the objective against the business need, restated my target, and then detailed the results. And again, it was a mix, for me, it was a mix of quantitative and qualitative. So again, I think that table really helps you get a lot of information across, but this is really critical. You're able to tie it all up, because it just makes the evaluators' jobs really simple if you can tell us what a good job you've done in a really digestible way. So finally, I'm just going to outline my reflections overall. Your evaluators need help. We see 10 of these. We see 10 of these every year that we do these, and they can be 100+ pages long. So really, thread the needle for us and lead us through your entry. Don't overthink it. As I say, IABC want you to succeed. They're giving you lots of data and lots of information about how the evaluators will review your work, and it's absolutely spot on. Having been on both sides of it, there's no tricks. They're not out to get you. They want you to succeed. I have to say, when I'm reading a lot of these as an evaluator, it's people who tell a story really engage you, and it makes those entries a joy to read. From a personal perspective, I had a bit of fun with mine. I hammed up my business. I shouldn't say hammed it up, but I wasn't shy of overstating the business need or indeed the challenges. And think of it as a story. As I say, who are your characters? You know, how does the plot thicken? So take us on the journey. And finally, Gold Quills are great for your career, whether you win or whether you've just received some really constructive feedback. It's a really worthwhile process, so I would highly recommend it. But I think I've probably said enough, and I'll hand over to any questions there might be.
Thank you, Ayllie. Can I kick it off? There was a question earlier about are judges allowed to be mentors? And Monika did say yes, we are. So there's one key point with regards to that. It's judges can be mentors, and definitely reach out to us if you would like to do that. For example, I mentor every year, and I'm happy to continue to do so. We have a conflict of interest policy. So if we are given an entry to evaluate and we know the person, or we're even in the same city, or we know the company or whatever, we do not evaluate those. So that is covered off. Monika, could you touch on there was a piece there about that one thing that we haven't covered off is ethics. So IABC have a requirement with regards to ethics and Gold Quills. Would you be able to touch on that?
What specifically? Oh, well, there's obviously a code of ethics that governs the organisation. So I encourage, if you're a member, you know, you need to be across it anyway. But even if you're not, it's actually a really useful framework to guide your communications activity. Any entry that is non-compliant is not going to win. So it is a good, I guess, another thing to check off. I mean, realistically, you should be doing this anyway, but it is worth just double checking, and sometimes reading through your entry in light of that code of ethics can throw into light perhaps ambiguities that might need to be clarified and what have you. So yeah, I guess that's my thoughts on ethics. Then there's also requirements, and Zora, you're probably closer across these than I am, around work that was done for IABC itself and the eligibility of entering that.
Yeah, if you've done work specifically for IABC or been paid to do work for, well, if you've done work specifically for IABC, it's not necessarily one that you would enter into these awards. So you can do it for silver quills at some of the regions, but not for the gold quills, no. The other thing to remember is that if you score a 5.125, you would then receive a silver quill, which is the Asia Pacific award. So you will, when you win a gold quill award, you actually are going to win a silver quill award as well. So, which is a really positive thing. Monika, did you want to, and Ayllie, I mean, we score these awards each year, and we get quite excited when we do find gold, but we're all also quite proud of people who do score above a 5 but don't get to a 5.25. Can you explain why we think that's a good thing? I know they don't win.
Yeah, I guess I've evaluated for 4 years and I've only struck gold once. So that's 40 odd entries. So it is really, it has to be really high quality work to receive a gold quill. And the one that I've found as an evaluator was a merit, wasn't an excellence. So that gives you a sense of how hard it is. But I guess we see a lot of entries that go very close, and that with just a little bit more work could absolutely, you see fantastic work and the entry just doesn't quite follow the structure, or they miss information out of a section where they should have included it, and it's those ones, you know, that are on the cusp of greatness, which do score close to that 5.25, but we can provide them with some feedback and they can go back and have another go. And unfortunately we don't get to see them the next year, but when you do see an entry where you've provided feedback and you see them have another go the following year, and they've picked up a quill, that's really exciting.
There was a question there about, was your work plan 4 pages?
Absolutely, my work plan was 4 pages. You guys probably saw about 25% of my work plan today, because it is a lot of information packed into 4 pages. and it was a fairly complex project. But yeah, what you've seen was probably about 25% of the 4 pages.
Sorry, go ahead, Monika.
You can include detail in the work sample that's not actually just the sample of your work. You can include summaries of research, you can include like a more detailed stakeholder analysis, but you need to be careful with that, because if the exact summary of that component isn't in the relevant section of the actual work plan, you can get penalised. So there are ways of including detail, but you do need to be a bit circumspect about it and sort of make sure that you do address the requirements of the body of the work plan as well.
The work sample, you can put up to 5 files in the work sample, and you need to think about how you order that work sample. So you can put, as Monika said, you could put the strategic piece, you could put the strategic plan, you could put the full example of the messaging, you can put the example of what the work actually looked like, the results, a whole range of things. Just don't make it 400 pages long.
You're not allowed to. It has to be under 100 pages. And then the other thing too that I've found useful when entering is in the work sample, numbering your pages, numbering your documents, and including a table of contents at the start. And that way you can cross-reference from your work plan or from the fields in the skills entry to your work sample. Makes it very easy for the judges to identify what you're talking about.
With regards to, just ask you one other question. With regards to the entries that you've seen, what do you think are the most common pitfalls?
Mon, I'll answer from my point of view. For me, I think there are 3 things that really really let some entries down. First of all, is that business need, and really articulating that well. As I say, it's got to matter. It's got to be a burning platform. It's got to go beyond the communications task to what the communications task needs to do for the broader business. And sometimes people just don't elevate that enough. So again, I would encourage people to give that some really careful thought, because if your work isn't either delivering to the bottom line, protecting reputation, enhancing engagement, then it's difficult to make a case for the strategic need for it. So really tie your comms work back to the strategic need of the business. The other 2 areas that I see is people missing key messaging. And that key messaging, as I say, I think there's an opportunity there to really use that to reinforce, again, the strategic need of your work, or address the strategic need of your work. So I think not listing your top 3 to 4 key messages is a real missed opportunity. And the other area is being really clear about SMART objectives and really nailing those down. And that is not easy. I know I find that really difficult when I craft communication strategies. And I found it even more difficult going back and doing it with the quill, in terms of just even being more robust about that. But I think if you can nail that down, nail those SMART objectives down, then that sets your submission up to succeed.
Did you want to add?
Yeah, look, picking up on what Ayllie said, there's some commonality in terms of her reflections and mine. On the SMART objectives, another thing that I would add is the importance of actually having outcome-based objectives. Quite often you'll see a lot of output-based objectives, 3 media releases, X number of column inches of coverage, etc. But, what difference did it make, and how did you measure the difference? It's really important to have some of those in there as well. Otherwise, you're just shooting into the sky, really. So again, it goes to that business need. You know, what is the outcome you are aiming for, and how did you go against that outcome? I've mentioned this before, but you know, getting the audience analysis right and actually including an analysis. Too many entries don't include an analysis; they just do a list. And then the other thing too that's quite common is entries that aren't written with the reader of the entry in mind. So, you know, too much information in too little space, not well ordered, not signposted, that kind of thing. So anything that you can include to help the evaluator understand the quality of your work and why it mattered is really helpful. So, you know, those rules that are in there about word count and column space and what have you, they're there for a reason. So I encourage people to focus their efforts on synthesis rather than work around of the word count.
All right, thank you. The one thing that I would say to everyone is there is a section that Monika referred to, which is the rubric for evaluators when we're judging. And if you can actually have a look on that, as Ayllie said, it's very transparent on the website. So you can see what score you're likely to get when you read your answer. You'll see if you would get a 4, you would see if you would get a 5, a 6, a 7. You'll see what it actually takes, and that's what the judges or the evaluators are actually looking at. So help yourself and check those out. The thing that I was going to say is definitely take advantage of our offer to match you with a mentor. So do reach out to IABC Asia Pacific. You can do it via our website, which is iabcapac.com. And I think that's a really important piece to do. I've won Quills, I've entered, I judge. I still have someone do that for me as well. So we're on time. So I'd like to say thank you to both Monika and Ayllie for sharing your insights as award winners, mentors and evaluators. We have a few other things to mention. Just IABC Asia Pacific has announced its conference for the region, which will be held in Wellington, New Zealand on the 25th and through to the 27th of March next year for Fusion 20. There will be the GCCC certification exam, the Regional Leadership Institute and the 2-day conference and the Silver Quill Gala. So the call for speakers is now out and the early bird tickets will go on sale in early November. So we will send you a link to this webinar for a recording. So if you want to look back at it again, you can. And you can share it with others along with a short survey and a certificate of attendance. So thank you all for being with us today. So thank you. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.